Because what we believe happens at the end impacts profoundly how we invest our time and energies today in the present. I've been, as I think we talked about in one of the recent preaching matters, I've been looking at 2 Peter recently, and particularly 2 Peter 3, and that has caused me to re-examine my thinking about the continuity and discontinuity between this creation and the next. There are key passages that we need to think about as we consider what lies beyond. Romans 8, 1 Corinthians 15, 2 Peter 3, Matthew 24, 25, and parallel gospel passages as Jesus talks about the end, and Revelation 21. Douglas Moo's written an article that was presented at Wheaton College on Romans 8 and on the end, eschatology, which raises some helpful points and questions. And my concern is that some of us are using a right stress on continuity, that in the new creation it will be physical, to encourage Christians to invest in an inappropriate way in aspects of this creation today. So what we think lies beyond does impact profoundly how we spend our time and energy today. And there's quite a lot of discussion around this, and a preaching matters on this subject I thought would be helpful. Well, my understanding of 2 Peter 3 is that whilst there may be continuity, it's a new heavens and a new earth, and therefore there will be physical things that are genuinely recognizable and a proper continuity, as in Romans 8 and the resurrection body of Jesus, 1 Corinthians 15. Nonetheless, there is radical discontinuity. Now, I first came across this idea that there might be such strong continuity when somebody tried to persuade me that because the image of the flood is used in 2 Peter 3:10, therefore what Peter envisages at the end of time is a washing, just as the flood didn't actually dissolve this creation. The trouble with that line, and the person who taught that to me or exposed that to me suggested therefore that I should be getting engaged in all sorts of environmental projects in this creation because they will come with me into the new. The trouble with that line of reasoning is that it doesn't follow the logic of 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 10. Now we must look at this very closely. Peter deploys the image of the flood to show that when God promises judgment, he keeps his promise. You can trust his word. But even within verse 10, the one verse at the end of 9 and 10, so you could say 2 verses, Peter changes the metaphor when he comes to talk about the end from flood, which makes the point about the word of God, to fire, dissolving, and exposure to talk about the end. Now, even if you take melting and fire, as Douglas Moo suggests, simply to talk about judgment, the language of melting and fire implies some sort of dissolving, some sort of disintegration, some sort of pulling apart of this creation at the end. And that same picture is carried across then into verse 12 and 13, when we are waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, the heavens will be set on fire and dissolved, and the heavenly bodies will melt as they burn. And it seems to me very, very hard indeed to be able to load into those terms simply judgment without some sort of radical disintegration, pulling apart. So then if we are to argue for continuity between this creation and the next, and I do, the new creation will be a physical reality that we can recognize with sensual pleasures and all the sorts of things that we would anticipate from Romans 8 and 1 Corinthians 15. The continuity can only come in the sense that a great molten pot made of gold, if it is burned, ends up as a lump of gold, to then be refashioned into some far, far greater golden, whatever it happens to be. So there is continuity there, but continuity only as a result of a radical cataclysmic change in the whole order. Matthew 24 and 25 are talking about the last day. You can't separate out Matthew 24 from Matthew 25, because Matthew 25 verse 1 begins with a therefore, and therefore the parables of Matthew 25, which are undeniably about the end of the age, mean that Matthew 24 must be ultimately about the end of the age. They can't simply be about the fall of Jerusalem. Now, the language of Matthew chapter 24, particularly verse 29, speak about the sun being darkened, the moon not giving its light, and the stars falling from the heavens. And people have suggested that this is apocalyptic language, the kind of language we find in the book of Isaiah. And in Isaiah, that kind of apocalyptic language is used to speak of the fall of earthly cities. And therefore Jesus is, shall I say, simply speaking about the fall of Jerusalem. Now that won't do, because in Isaiah, the fall of cities, Babylon and Jerusalem, that image itself is used to speak about the cataclysmic end at the end of the age. And so even if it is apocalyptic language to speak about the fall of Jerusalem, within its original context in Isaiah, that language is used as an illustration of the final cataclysmic end of the universe as the heavenly elements are pulled apart and the whole universe is dissolved by its creator in judgment. So I'm suggesting that in the Gospels we mustn't misunderstand the context back in Isaiah, and to do so results in a wrong understanding of the end. In Revelation chapter 21, again, some people have suggested that the passing away of this creation might simply be about judgment and not about a passing away of this physical creation. And they've then gone to Revelation 21 verse 24, and they've suggested that the kings of the earth bringing their glory into the heavenly city means that the kings of this physical creation here and now will bring into the heavenly city the cultural artifacts that have been accumulated and the good works that people have done in this physical creation. Now again, that is completely to misunderstand Revelation 21, because the kings of the earth in Revelation 21 are the kings of the new heavens and the new earth, the kings of the new creation. They are, if you like, the redeemed creatures, those who've been conquerors who have received the crown of righteousness from earlier on in the book of Revelation. And the picture is of all of the new heavens and the earth, bringing all the glory of the new creation into the new heavenly Jerusalem. It's a glorious picture of everything that was meant to happen. To suggest that it's me bringing my painting or the bit of the city that I happen to have restored myself, or somebody bringing what they've worked on through their life into the new creation is simply sloppy exegesis. And we mustn't allow that kind of thing to cause us to encourage Christians to focus on the wrong sort of thing in this creation. Well, this takes us right the way back to where we began. What I teach, what I believe about the end, impacts profoundly what I encourage people to invest and what I invest my own energies in today. If I think there's going to be an exam at the end of the course, then if I've got any sense, I'll engage in revising. If I think there's going to be an audit, then I'll engage in the accounts. If I think there's going to be an end-of-year review, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. So what I think is happening at the end will impact profoundly what I engage in the present. And the kind of language I've been hearing just over the last few months is along the following lines. For example, somebody said to me recently, oh, well, of course there will be bankers in the new creation, and therefore I must engage wholeheartedly in my work as a banker today in anticipation that something of that will carry across. Somebody else has said to me, oh, well, I must apply a resurrection ethic to the way I do my architecture as I build this particular building. Others, as I've said, have talked about redeeming the structures of a particular part of the city in anticipation that those structures themselves will come across with me. And somebody else said to me, well, of course, though Wagner himself won't be in the new creation, the music of Wagner will. Now, what I've noticed is that people, in all of those instances, tend to take kind of middle-class, bourgeois ideas and say, well, of course, we're going to find them in the new creation. You very rarely hear somebody saying, well, Meatloaf won't be in the new creation, but the music of Meatloaf will, or Eminem won't be in the new creation, but the music of Eminem will. It tends to be kind of bourgeois middle-class things that we all like to do, and therefore we justify that they're going to be there. Now, that's simply not the emphasis that you find in the New Testament. In the New Testament, as I've suggested, we find that there's going to be a radical discontinuity. This creation is going to be dissolved. Yes, there'll be real continuity. We will find the beauty that God has created in all its different ways, but radical discontinuity with this broken, fallen world dissolved. And therefore the New Testament writers are encouraging us to do completely different things to that. Matthew 24:25, we are to maximize the resources that have been entrusted to us for the sake of the gospel. Matthew 25, the parable of the talents. Romans 8, we are to engage groaning in prayer in this suffering world as we long for his coming again. So the continuity, as this creation groans, should drive the Christian to urgent groaning prayer in the pain of suffering in this world. 1 Corinthians 15 has nothing to do with me finding a specific art project that I've worked on in this world in the new creation. It's absolutely nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with me engaging in the work of the gospel, so that we are to be steadfast and immovable and always abounding in the work of the Lord. One writer recently has suggested that we can use a parable by a 20th century writer who was a Roman Catholic and taught purgatory. We can use that parable to say that 1 Corinthians 15:58 is actually about all my work as a banker or an insurance broker or something like that, or an artist, rather than about the work of the Lord. And then we come across to Revelation chapter 21, and in Revelation 21, of course, the application is in the first chapters of Revelation, chapter 2 and 3, given this glorious new city and given this glorious new creation where everything will flow to the glory of God. Be a conqueror, endure, keep going under persecution. And I don't think we mentioned 2 Peter 3, where of course Peter says, since all things are going to be dissolved in this kind of way, go and write a concerto. Of course he doesn't say that. He says, live a godly life. That's what matters. And so what we believe about the end will profoundly impact what we teach. And we need to get our thinking about the end clear so that we don't lead Christians into ungodly paths in the present.